Welcome to the Forward Miami show. My name is Damian Pardo, and I'm your host for today. To my left is JC. He's on the board of Forward Miami and a social media influencer. And if you don't know Forward Miami, the number 4, WARD Miami, it's a local nonprofit that specializes on diversity and inclusion and bringing what is sometimes the segregated parts of the community together. To my right is the incredibly distinguished Congresswoman Illeana Ros-Lehtinen.
Damien, you're too kind.
Who is my
Stop it,
shiro
JC.
in many ways. The first Hispanic elected to Congress, 3 decades serving in Congress.
I'm old.
No, you're amazing. You're amazing, which is a completely different thing. In my world, the most remarkable things, Congresswoman Ros-Lehtinen, AIDS, HIV, I used to be the president of HCN. I remember at the time, nobody dealt with AIDS, HIV, but you did. And you were one of the people on the forefront, providing funding, providing services, worried about this community.
We started the HIV AIDS caucus with Barbara Lee and bipartisan caucus. And, before that, people were really skittish about it. I was too. I mean, it's education. You have to teach people what it's about. And boy, we've moved far the way we deal with HIV AIDS. But once upon a time, it was... nobody would touch it.
But not only that, I mean, LGBTQ rights. You were on the forefront of LGBTQ rights. So this is all part of my welcome.
Oh, you're so nice. Thank you.
because you're really just so spectacular for this community, And
well, I loved every day was such an honor. Damian and JC, it was really an honor to serve our community. And there's so many pockets of our community that are marginalized, that are ostracized. We got to build bridges and bring people together. And there's not enough of that. And it just seems like a toxic environment when you go to Washington these days. But we can go back. We can go back and build that trust again. Trust each other again.
Sure can. Question about LGBTQ rights. What kind of drew you to be such a leader in those issues like HIV, AIDS, LGBTQ?
Well, for me, it was listening to my kids. And I think for a lot of people my age, we get educated by our kids about the reality of what's going on and their friends. And you open up your ears and to new experiences and find out from them. Of course, Dexter and I have had our own personal journey with having Rigo, a transgender child who's now, of course, an adult and an
amazing advocate,
National
right? Center for Transgender Equality.
I know. So he's going to be the new director of this national center starting this summer. So we're very proud of Rigo. We're proud of all of our kids. We have 4 adult children and equally proud of each and every one of them. So it was a personal journey for us because, it's a shock for most parents if your child tells you, I'm identifying in another gender. And so I tell parents all the time, because they do contact me, Damian and JC, and I said, listen, be compassionate. What you don't want to do is throw them out in the streets, because that's what happens in so many families. And life can be hard for all of us in the best of circumstances. And when we feel that we're different than everybody else, it gets that much tougher for that.
But now, on the record, you were already supportive.
But I was already there. Yeah,
exactly. So that's kind of like, I'm curious as to what took you there.
Well, our community. I mean, when you look around our community, we have folks from different places and folks from different perspectives, different ways of thinking, and different sexual orientation and gender identity. We have a very loving community and a very accepting community. And I think that Miami really is a reflection of me, and I'm a reflection of Miami. So I would say that my community taught me a lot. And I was so proud to represent Key West, proud to represent South Beach. And those are areas where you have more folks who are interested in these kinds of issues, talk to you about it. And I think community involvement in these issues is so key. And shows like yours, I mean, you're educating people who are listening to us, and maybe they've not even thought about this issue, but they're tuning in. And thanks to Michael and Grant Miller,
Yes.
for this
Thank you,
opportunity.
Michael and
They're
Greg.
not even
Finally,
listening.
never-
He's
we
eating
never-
a
never say
chocolate chip
thank you.
cookie over
We're
there.
the most ingracious.
I know, horrible.
Ungrateful.
But I'd love to ask you a question about kind of your experience with your child coming out, because we always hear about the coming out story, but I don't think there's enough stories from the parents' perspective and what they go through, especially in our community, and like what my parents went through. And I always think, we're a very specific group, in our community that doesn't handle it very well. What was your experience like?
No, you're so right. And I think that sometimes stereotypes are truthful.
Yeah.
And in our community, and I say that, Hispanic community, sometimes people are very skittish, but you start to, you talk to, you're open about it. You talk to people. And my dad, he's passed away a long time ago, but he was 83 years old. And Rigo talked to my father about his experiences, his grandfather, and he was accepting of it. So sometimes we need to get over our fright and really say what's going on. And you'll find that people are more accepting than not.
Yeah.
So sometimes we're our own stumbling blocks. We think, oh no, mi tía no va a entender, my aunt's not gonna, y mi abuela, ella no sabe, and we're worried. But
It's true.
I tell you, my 83-year-old dad was okay with it. So we're getting better as a community and as a culture and as a Hispanic community.
Yeah.
So learn from your kids, talk to them, and you're better off for it. And I always worry about especially trans kids, because it's a difficult hurdle for parents, and that's why you find out that those kids are more likely to drop out of school, more likely to be living on the streets, getting involved in drug use, cycle of poverty and depression and suicide even. So we've got to stop that.
And Congresswoman, recently in the Florida House, they had the transgender bill, which specifically sought to eliminate transgender kids in school sports from playing on teams. Do you want to share kind of your thinking?
I think as that cliche says, it's a solution in search of a problem. I don't find that this has been a problem in our community, but they have a bill to stop this and stop that from happening. And there's a lot of fear mongering, and, vote your conscience. And I'm not criticizing those who voted for it. And you vote the way you want to vote, but we should be honest about what's really going on. Is this really a problem? Is this the most pressing problem? Is this what the youth of our community really need the most help with? And I think we need to establish more of an environment of acceptance, of loving, of understanding, and less ostracizing and making people feel so bad for how different they might see themselves. There's a lot of self-hate going on in many groups, and we've got to build bridges and not do an us versus them. So I don't know what they hope to fix with that problem, but there it is. So some different governors have handled it in different ways. Some have vetoed it, some have signed bills like that. But there are about 50 bills right now in state legislatures that are aimed at anti-trans kids, and we could do better.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think some of it has to do with not understanding that community, not having any real world experience, and like with everything else, I used to be a teacher, so I believe in the power of education. So educating people about the reality, I think goes a long way. And once I know you, and once I understand you, I'm better able to value you as a human being for what you are. And every human life has value, and we shouldn't dehumanize the trans community in this way.
Do you think this kind of political climate has been similar in the past? Because I feel like a lot of these types of bills that are happening now, the hatred that we're seeing, especially with the trans community, is tied in with the political climate, right? Like, we all believe in one thing, so that we're grouping in this category. I mean, do you think that's happened in the past, or this is something new that we're dealing with that we are now having to assess, and then kind of moreover find a bill that finds this a problem?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And we really need to self-examine, each one of us, saying, why is this really the best that I can do? Is this really the kind of bill that's going to build better communities, stronger communities, good for education, good for advancement? Or is it really trying to hurt kids and to make them feel more isolated than they are? So I think that we've gone through these phases before in our society, and that's how we used to treat folks who were gay, and we didn't quite understand what that was. We've come so far. I mean, with marriage equality, with adoptions.
And you're working on the Equality Act.
And the Equality Act, you know, we're so close to making that a reality, and that's an incredible piece of legislation that's going to pave the way for equality. That's why it's called Equality Act, because it is to treat people the same way, no matter your gender identity, your sexual orientation. So we've come very far, thanks to the courts mostly, but we still have a long ways to go. But education empowers you to understand what's going on in your community. And we have a wonderful community here in South Florida. You know, maybe in some communities, I'm not going to diss on any state, but maybe in a little town in Arkansas, it's very hard for a child who doesn't, you know, he says, there's something different about me and I don't quite know what it is. And if you have a loving community, then that's going to be a better environment for that child to live his authentic life. And what you want is no suicides, no depressions, no dropping out of school, no drug use. We want all of our kids to have a wonderful life. I had a wonderful life. You guys have a wonderful life, but it's not always the same in so many families.
Well, it's such a pleasure just listening to you talk, because, you know, you're saying, well, you know, whichever way you vote, and I respect that opinion, and it might be different, and education and learning and be open. And it just seems like so surreal, because we're in this climate that's so toxic, where partisanship has just gone polar opposites. And unless you're here, you're against everything.
You know, and I think that it's a product of the demographics in many states, because the majority party could be the majority party in every election cycle. The margin of victory is just like 5 or 7 seats that go from one party control to the other. And then when the stakes are that high, people tend to see the other person from the other party as the enemy rather than your colleague. And I think that when things settle down, it's going to be a lot better. But just think, in the Senate, it's 50-50. So, you know, although it's more collegial in the Senate than it is in the House, but in the House, there's only a majority at any given year of 5 to 7 votes. So you tend to have a lot of gotcha moments and tend to look at.
But you were kind of known for reaching across the aisle. You were known for that.
Well, Damian, I was so happy, and JC, that I was rated one of the most bipartisan members of Congress by the Lugar Center in Indiana University for several years in a row. Boy, I thought that was the greatest badge of honor.
Yes, it would
But
be.
I find that now, being bipartisan, people think they like somebody bipartisan, but in their heart of hearts, they want somebody who's really going to be on, fighter. And I say, you can be a fighter and be bipartisan. It doesn't mean that you're weak. Being bipartisan makes you stronger.
Compromise is weak.
They see compromise as a 4-letter word. You're so right. And that's how we used to make laws. You know, I give in a little, you give in a little, and that's how you make a good law. But it doesn't have to be my way or the highway. So there's little flexibility these days in American politics.
So talking about Miami-Dade, there's an issue that just always gets under my skin.
Oh, what is it?
And it's just does, and it's Cuba. Because my whole life, it's an issue that's gotten under my skin.
For you, yes.
Under my skin, because I'm LGBTQ and I'm Cuban, and I see the inconsistencies and the clashing and how it doesn't make sense. And, you know, I have to wonder, how is it that as a community in Miami-Dade County, 64% Cuban American, we cannot somehow educate the broader community on this issue to understand that a hardliner is not, is not a hardliner. That's kind of propaganda.
That's right.
And that really the hardline here is being held by a communist regime that has been repressing.
That is the hardliner.
That is a hardliner.
And
So-
you see, and I'm so glad we were talking before we got on the air, Damian, JC, and I asked him, who's going to be your guest next week? And he says, Rosa Maria Paya. And here's a young lady who lost her father,
Yeah.
Osvaldo Paya, a wonderful freedom fighter in Cuba. And she was living in Cuba. She had to leave Cuba. And he was killed by the Castro regime because he was a human rights activist. And his number one agenda was, we need free elections in Cuba. And for that, they ran him off the road and they literally killed him. And so Rosa Maria Paya is heading this movement here in exile internationally called Cuba Decide. And it's a very simple proposition. Let's allow Cubans to decide their
for
fate.
themselves.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But in Cuba, there is no election. There are no political parties except the Communist Party. There's no newspaper except the Communist newspaper. There's no nothing. You can't watch television unless it's state controlled. And people here sometimes don't understand that it really is a one-party dogma system, and there's no freedom of expression. And then they have, that lady who says that she's all for LGBTQ rights, and they parade
Mariela.
Mariela. And then
who gay rights groups invite her to lead their parades in the U.S.
Yes.
So I need Pepto-Bismol whenever
I know, it's terrible. It's terrible
whenever I read that.
because you will only accept LGBTQ individuals in Cuba if you are with the regime.
Exactly.
But if you're LGBTQ but want freedom and want democracy and want multi-party elections and want freedom of thought and freedom for political prisoners, then she doesn't recognize you. So it's all about the communist control, and the LGBTQ issue is secondary. But they parade it as if it's a mecca for friendly to gays, and it's not. It's not.
No, and in fact, during the 80s and 90s, we all know that they had the work camps. I mean, they were one of the most brutal
had camps where
regime.
they isolated folks because of their sexual orientation, and if you had HIV/AIDS, they would definitely isolate you.
Yeah.
And but now we're not supposed to talk about any of that. It's like a great.
But I have a really
mecca.
basic question. Why? Why is it that it has become a partisan issue where the Democrats want to engage and the Republicans want to call it what it is on human rights? And, you were very involved in the Foreign Affairs Committee and a lot of international relations.
Yeah. Along with Lincoln Diaz-Balart and Mario Diaz-Balart. Now we have Salazar. And
but
Jimenez,
now that's all seen as this hardliner block of these
and it really, because all we're talking about is freedom of expression. Who can be against that? That's a wonderful thing. Free elections, multi-party systems. What is hardline about that? And it's not to impose the U.S. system on Cuba. It's to allow people to have freedom. And right now you have artists, right this minute, artists who are in jail because they want freedom of expression for their art. And they throw them in jail, and they're on hunger strikes. And who knows, by the time this program is seen by people, many of them will have died. Right this moment, they're on hunger strikes.
So I'm wondering, and this is a constant curiosity for me, why the coverage isn't there locally in English.
It's a shame.
Why aren't we helping our own community by trying to understand these issues with each other? Because that's the best way to do it, whether it's systemic racism or whether it's the MSI movement in Havana.
Yes.
Why aren't we? What is the barrier? Why can't?
Well, and I think maybe perhaps, we need to look in the mirror and say, maybe I'm not the perfect messenger. Maybe I'm not saying it in the right way so we can win hearts and minds. So it's a little bit, that they're being opaque in the way that they look at it. It's not really, you're dogmatic and I'm for everything.
Right.
No, what you want is to keep the Cuban people oppressed. You're for denying them the right of expression. So maybe we need to be better proponents of our points of view. So the fault lies with all of us.
I always ask this question because I'm the millennial. I'm the opposite of Damian. We have these conversations all the time, and I'm the guy who just doesn't care as much as he does. I'm very interested, obviously, because I'm Cuban, and my grandparents did a lot, to get here.
Los abuelos are always
exactly. But I always wonder, what you would say to someone like myself or younger who have these ties to Cuba who just don't care. Like what what would you say to them to miss you, or that they should care or listen at all?
Well, that is a great question. First of all, I would say that it's not about Castro, or it's not about who's the leader or the ruler of Cuba. It's about individual Cubans. And you say you like your freedom, you like to do whatever you want to do within the confines of the law,
Right.
and you want to express yourself. Do you know that in 90 miles away there's a little island where you cannot say what's in your heart unless it's part of the dogma of the Communist Party?
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to live under that system? And people want to stay in Cuba. They love Cuba, but they say, this system has got to change. And you have young people like Rosa Maria Paya, who grew up in Cuba, who understands the system because that was her life.
Yeah.
And then there was no place for her. There was no future for her in Cuba because she would have been killed. Her mother would have been killed. And so they had to seek freedom elsewhere. So this is the land where we all come to live out our dreams.
Yeah.
But in Cuba, they can't live out their dreams because the regime just wants to keep them down. Everyone wants to realize their dreams, and everyone wants to be the best that they can be, like the slogan says. But in Cuba, you have to fit a mold. And no one wants to be told what to do and what to say. You as a young person would not like that. Yeah. You would last 10 minutes in Cuba.
Oh, not even.
He would be on a hunger strike. And we would wear T-shirts with your name.
But then in a lot of
Save JC.
Yeah, probably.
Libertad.
Patria y vida. But yet, a lot of times what we see in progressive circles are, the classic cars, the mojitos, the change is happening again. Right? The change is happening.
Since I'm an old hag. I've been in public office. I was first elected in 1982.
Wow.
Before JC was born. And every 2 years when I ran for election, everybody told me, but it's changing. It's changing. Oh boy, there's more, people are thinking different things, and it's still the same. It's still the same. If it's a communist system, you're never going to have freedom. It's as simple as that.
And why is it that we don't hear about the sex tourism?
That's right. The human trafficking and the doctors.
By the way, everybody knows it. I'll have friends that say, "Oh, they love Americans there." I'm like, "No, they love to eat."
Well, to be fair, I didn't know until recently. I wasn't aware of that until Damian brought it to my attention, and then I started asking around, and it's very much a real thing.
Very much a real thing. And then somebody who's there on vacation for a week, and they'll say, "Oh, I really got to know Cuba." I said, "No, you went there as an American, and you're treated differently." And they'll
because that's not our life here. Yeah. We can't imagine
that
living
life
like
goes
that.
I know. And they say, well, look at what a humanitarian Castro is. He sends all these doctors and nurses overseas to heal the sick. They don't know that is money that goes into the regime's pockets. Mm-hmm. And those doctors and nurses are exploited, and they get a pittance of what those countries pay the regime. Wow. So when you hear about these medical brigades saving people's lives, they are wonderful people. The doctors and the nurses, hats off to them. But the regime is exploiting them for propaganda purposes.
Or when you hear there's no racism in Cuba, free education is wonderful, free healthcare. I don't understand where this even comes from.
I know. And then Michael Moore made this unbelievable documentary called
That Clinic in Havana.
Oh my gosh. And it talks about the great healthcare system in Cuba. And I said, we have Cubans coming here all the time, and they come here for an operation, and they come here because they're sick, and we help them here. And where is this great system? But if you're an American tourist and you get sick, you will be treated well, but not because Castro wants you healthy. He wants to make sure that you go tell a good story. My phone's going off.
Don't worry, take your time.
So sorry.
No, don't worry about it.
So this health tourism is something that Castro promotes to get more people over to Cuba, and you will never know the real Cuba if you go there as a tourist. As an American tourist, you're worth so much to them. Yeah. They will make sure that nothing happens to you and that you will be taken care of. But you can't come back after a vacation in Cuba and say you know the real Cuba,
Right.
because you haven't. You're an American. That's a
Right.
wonderful
Yeah.
thing for them.
And my parents, I don't think my parents want me to go to Cuba. You know what I mean? But there was like a moment where you could take a cruise. Like, what would you say? Should we or should we not go to Cuba?
You know, I think that that's an individual's choice.
Yeah.
You know, do whatever feels right for you. But know that when you go, you're being fed a pack of lies.
Yeah.
It's all propaganda, and you're not going to know the real Cuba after you spend a week in Cuba, because you're going to be treated like a wonderful American who's going to spend a lot of money over there. So, you know, that's a decision that people have to make for themselves. But that money goes to fuel the propaganda machine and to keep people down, and it doesn't help the Cuban people.
What can we do better? What can we do better to try to bring people, like you said, looking in the mirror, what can we as Cubans?
Well, first of all, people like you who aren't, you know, your typical anti-Castro exile leader. I mean, you guys who are young and you have a forward-thinking television show, you don't fit the mold of what people think of somebody who's espousing freedom for Cuba. And that's how we have to look at it. We're just talking about freedom for the Cuban people. We all want to live in freedom. Who wants to live in an enslaved society where you're told what to think and what to say? And we should want for Cuba what we want here, which is freedom to live your life, free of discrimination, and free to be what you want to be. That's what I'd like for my grandchildren. That's what I'd like for everybody's grandkids. And happy Mother's Day to everybody.
Happy Mother's Day.
Very
Happy Mother's Day. And for here, you were talking about here, and for here, Miami-Dade, how do we do a better job of creating these alliances or shared vision with
Alliances.
BLM?
That's it.
BLM
Yes.
and the Afro-Cuban,
Yes.
movement.
We need to we need to
Havana.
build those bridges so that it's not just Cubans talking to Cubans.
Right.
And this group talking to that. No, we need, there are lots of different organizations and but there's not much mingling. Here in Miami, we do a pretty good job. In other communities, people are more segregated. So we have a pretty good community here, and I just love living in South Florida.
Yeah.
I mean, look at this background. I wish I were right there in Biscayne Bay right now. They told me that after the show we're going boating, right?
Yes,
CJ and
absolutely.
JC and Damien. That's what they told me.
Can we
I don't know.
go back to the Equality Act? 'Cause I don't know enough about it, and I want to know kind of your role in it. We didn't.
Well, it's a very good bill. It's passed the House. We hope to get it passed through the Senate, and it just would extend equal rights protections to people who they cannot be discriminated against based on their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And it's motherhood and apple pie in my way of thinking. And so I'm hoping that the Senate will pass it, and we're hoping for good things.
Well, definitely. We definitely hope so too.
Well, I want to thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah.
And I
What
guess
a pleasure.
the boat ride will be for the second visit.
The second
Right,
visit.
JC? Right, Damien?
The second visit,
All right.
definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we
And
look forward.
Word did a very good job there.
Thank
in the
you,
production. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Word. We look forward
Damien
to seeing
and
you
JC,
again.
Thank you,
los
thank
quiero
you.
mucho. Thank
Gracias.
you. All right.
Gracias.
Things are getting
We'll
better.
see you next week on the Forward Miami Show.